Yes, microphone check 1 2 1 2. Microphone check 1 2 1 2. How you doing? How you doing Instagram? How you doing Facebook? It's your boy GNL Zamba. I don't know how your Sunday is going, but my Sunday has been fabulous. Woke up in the morning, um, started catching up with people, um, started reading through what I was meant to do for the day, and started watching this very interesting movie um, called Brexit. And so many of us have heard about Brexit, and I think it has been like a very interesting watch. Just Cumberbatch has really put on like a great performance in that, and also it gives you like an explanation of what was going on behind the scenes when the whole Brexit thing was happening. When they were talking about Cambridge Analytica and what was going on in the background, it's like really interesting. So what's happening right now? I'm on Facebook. I'm on Facebook right here, and when I'm looking at you over here, I'm on Instagram Live. But I'll be posting this, or we'll be switching everything over to my YouTube page, which is GNL Zamba. Go ahead and subscribe on that page, because that's where this discussion is going to be going to. The reason why I'm doing this is because it's Black History Month. Shout out to all the comments coming from Facebook. It's Black History Month, and I would like to examine the idea of what Black history is and what that means to us as a people. Some people don't see the relevance in history, but I'm one of those people that sees so much that can be learned from history, and the lessons that it has for our present times in terms of us as human beings, what it means, and also being Black History Month. This time I'm going to concentrate to show you how much or how important Black history is to the history of the rest of the world, or how all those other histories are interlinked and interconnected. Shout out to Nathan Media that's watching me right now. Everybody go on to my YouTube page, that's GNL Zamba. Subscribe, because this month is going to be a very special month. It's going to be Black History Month, and it's going to be one of my most favorite subjects, and we're going to be examining some of the most important, I should say, some of the most important questions that Africans and Black people in general, and the world in general, and human nature should be asking themselves at this particular point. We're talking about the morality, the moral questions that our society has, or has been posing to us, as in what is going to be our history, as our generation, what is going to be our legacy, what are we leaving behind. And it's very important that you begin studying history, the right way, and portraying and posing all these other questions to our generation now. So that's one of the things which I believe I'm passionate about. Some of the things I'm still learning, and some of the things that I already know, I'll be giving you my opinion about. So join me on my Facebook. I'm going to be switching over from I'm going to be switching off my Instagram Live, and I'm going to be going to my GNL Zamba page and my YouTube Live. So join me there. Peace and love. Let's see you on the other side. Cheers. So now I'm just on Facebook Live. Bachali bange mugamba chi. I sequestered Krena Gamba Zamba story chi. We are good. How are you, Josh Casey? What's good, bro? Somebody's like Otula Konyo nawe kakando gamba chi. Somebody's like from Denmark is called Enoch Mubiru, and Amor Kawesa is like my bestie. I have so many besties, you know. I have so many besties, man, from Africa, from everywhere. Basically, I feel like I'm one of those people who has been blessed to have so many friends coming from so many other places of the world. Some people I've just got to know as I'm getting older. Some people have been younger, and like they cut across like several classes. I have rich people that I do are like extremely rich. They don't have to work a day in their lives. And I also know like extremely poor people who have to go fetch water before they go to school. Mothers who are struggling with about 7 kids, no husband. So I have like a broad spectrum of friends, and I think I'm being put in a lucky position where I have such a great wealth of community to draw from. So for my YouTube and Facebook page, I'd like to let you know that I appreciate you from wherever you're listening to me from. And for many people who know me from my musical background, the people that I've performed for, we've had some great times. The legacy continues. Follow me on GNL Zamba on all my platforms, GNL Zambagram on Instagram, YouTube, just go to GNL Zamba. Basically, my YouTube page is going to be basically about improving the conversation that we should have as human beings, as a society, and also like basically sharing opinions with everybody. Like right now we're talking about Black history. And for Black history, which is one of the most important challenges we have as Africans and as Black people everywhere, is that even people as old as I am, or even our parents' age, there's a certain period that happened which was so bad in African lives that there has been a total disconnect of who we are as a people. Like we don't know who an African is meant to be and what they're meant to represent because of the effects of, and I'm not blaming here, we are in the era where people don't want to blame and go into that, but the facts should be spoken that the effects of colonialism and imperialism are still affecting Africans and Black people up to now. The legacy of colonialism is well still alive in the minds of so many Africans, and it has caused a distorted picture of what Africans are. Now, history is the study of human events. It has a particular interest in how certain events happened, particularly in human affairs. Now, if you're to consider history that has been taught to us by people who saw us as less human, you have to be aware that so many undertones and so many ways in which we have been depicted in that history that has been written has been unfair. There's so much to say over there, but coming from so many imperialists and so many colonizers that came over to the African continent, they saw Africans as subhuman. And there was this piece of work that I was reading from one of my most inspirational poets, and it captures it really well. I want to share this poem with you. Let me read it. Let me read it to you. He says, and this is Jill Scott Heron. He says, I was wondering about our yesterdays and how I started searching through the rubble. And to say the least, someone went through a whole lot of trouble to make sure that when we looked things up, we wouldn't fare too well. And what we would come up with would be unreliable portraits of ourselves. But I compiled a few facts so that I could I compiled a few facts, as they are, to see if we could come up with a little bit of light. And this is what I got so far. He's saying that I'm compiling the facts from how you're meant to believe them, from how they were meant to be written, and how you are meant to be taking them in. And I must warn you, it takes on a very sarcastic tone. He says, first, the white folks discovered Africa, and they claimed it fair and square. Sir Rhodes couldn't have been robbing anybody because there were no people to be robbed in the first place. There were no people there. That means when the Europeans came over, the scramble and partition of Africa, they never saw it as a land that belonged to a people. So to them, they were just taking something which belonged to nobody because Africans were considered to be nobody. And yeah, the poem still continues on, and it says, white folks brought all the civilization. This is not true. I'm telling you, the poem is taking on a very sarcastic tone. It says, white folks brought all the civilization, and they said there was nobody around. And if you examine most of the history that we Africans have been taught, or what we've been learning in school, is that there has been no African history until the first missionaries stepped foot in Africa. Correct me if I'm wrong, but most of your history books don't go far back beyond 1780 or 1886. Even what I was taught in my schools was this dude who I've never met, who has no relevance to who I am right now, called Pierre Lugard, some Catholic or Protestant. I don't really care. What I'm saying is that that's the history that they begin teaching in African schools. Now, my generation has a little bit of luck that we are exposed to so many books out of the Bible, and we can form our own opinions after all this knowledge that we are being exposed to. But to our parents and our grandparents, the schools where they were taught, it was even almost illegal to look beyond the Bible or even begin questioning what was written in there. And so many other history books that saw us as subhuman, it was the same mentality that was being taught to them. So their generation will not see reason in what I'm talking about the relevance of correcting the stories of our history. Let me finish this poem. So Joe Scott Heron continues and says, there wasn't anyone around, because how could these folks be civilized? They didn't write anything down. See, most people do not claim relevance of African history because they'll ask you, where is it written? But the wealth of African culture, the wealth of African wisdom did not lie. It's a very Western thing, or a very Western way to think that everything must be written down for it to have relevance. I'll give you some facts here, some things to begin considering. That even the oldest book that you know, some of the oldest books that you know, have only been written about 2,500 years before Jesus. That's a very small time gap. And then the Bible being written about 50 years AD, after Domino, after Jesus. That's a very small window. To show you how small that window is, the earth has been in existence for about 4.5 billion years. 4.5 billion years. Now consider the history of you only taking into account 2,000 years after Jesus died and 2,000 years before Jesus was born. That's the history period that you're considering. But when you look back in history and how communication began and how early people was telling stories in Africa, you will get to discover that stories of history have been told even before languages were invented. Allow me explain. Even before languages were invented, the Africans or the early humans were already drawing paintings in caves. They were already, when they invented tools, they began carving stone and creating all these stories. That's why the Egyptians have hieroglyphs, but that there is an earlier story that even predates Egypt and the hieroglyphs that you see right now that you're able to study. That means there is a wealth of history. There is a history gap about the identity of Africans. The earliest people having been from Africa. That means that there is a history that's so long been ignored because it wasn't written, because it was drawn, and also because most Africans never choose to write, because the history was stored in names and songs and proverbs. So those are some of the things, the ingenuity or the simplicity of life that most white people, when they came off to Africa, they never saw that as civilized. You having tradition and orature is not civilized to a person who carries a gun and tells you if you can't write A, if you can't write B, you're not a civilized human being. So they began writing all these stories about Africans. Some of the stories, false if you ask me. Some of the stories you laugh if you begin examining the holes in them. But those are the stories that are still being propagated up to now, that even on CNN, even on BBC, even on Al Jazeera, so many people are going to draw a certain picture of Africa before they even begin reconciling the facts of what it means to be African and how many great things the Africans and the black people have been able to contribute to the world. Things like paper, things like art, things like dance, things like music are all attributes that should be attributed to the very first earliest civilization of black people in Africa. But many Africans will tell you that because Beethoven wrote those notes on those 5 lines, that makes that music more important or carry more importance than the songs where Africans just know this natural rhythm, where you just beat on a drum, where your ancestors have songs which are older. In Mali, they have songs which are like 10,000 years old. You get me? 10,000. They tell you this song that I'm going to play for you is 10,000 years old. That's just to throw a little bit of light into what we should be considering in Black history, especially being Black History Month. I believe that there is a role for us to play as Africans into re-educating ourselves, into redefining who we are, and studying our own history and putting more emphasis into redefining ourselves, because it actually, one story, when your story is being defined by another person, it often falls prey to, you often fall prey to being portrayed not in the right ways. The most racist propaganda is portrayed through people attempting to explain African stories. There are plays out here in the US, ever since I began living in the US, you hear they tell you, oh, such and such a story is about a country called Uganda, such and such a play, such and such, we only know Idi Amin used to eat people, we know A, B, C, and D. And you often come from a place of pitying those people. I used to just pity how much they never knew. But then I also make fun of myself about how much I don't know so much about places like South America or some places like in Eastern Europe. So the ignorance is everywhere. All of us are guilty of the ignorance. But it will be a catastrophe if none of us took effort to correct the wrongs that have been told in history for so long. And that's one of the reasons why I'm making this discussion on my YouTube. That's why I want to invite all the people who are interested in that kind of discussion to join me so that we can begin chatting and espousing knowledge. And you can suggest through the comments over here, because I see so many comments over here. You can suggest through comments some of the topics that you would want us to explore and some of the things that you would want us to read. Interesting African stories. I'll switch over to my languages. Ekinyumanyo bwe mpulira abaana abazalibwa mu Africa, baana bangi abazalibwa mu Africa, bw'omulaga ettaala agamba ho omuzungu yakola ettaala, bw'omulaga fridge n'agamba bannanga omuzungu yakola ekyuma, bw'omulaga everything that you'd show them, they will say the white man invented that, the white man invented this, simply because the imperialistic literature, the Western literature, the Eurocentric literature that we have been exposed to, ebalaga nti bazungu bokka be baakayiiya buli kintu kye balaba mu nsi. Bw'ogamba omwana omufirika nti olaba olupapula baddugavu be baalukola. Black people invented paper from papyrus. Papyra is an Egyptian invention of the rivers of the Nile. They put paper together, began squeezing out the water, they were drying and batandika okukola scrolls ez'okuwandiikako. Some of the oldest libraries and universities ever, the concept of a university that people come together, gather knowledge, and then begin studying and people begin teaching, is an African concept. Naye tugamba omwana omufirika eyakazaalibwa mu gy'ekinaana oba egy'ekyenda. They will tell you that's impossible, because to them Cambridge and Oxford and Harvard is where they want to go. They will not tell you about Timbuktu, they will not tell you about Cairo, they will not tell you about the University of Alexandria, Alexander the Great were collecting ebitabo byonna ebyava mu Africa n'abiteeka mu kifo kimu. They will not tell you about any of that because they have not taken the time, or we as a generation have not taken the time to educate ourselves about what history is and what history means. That means we as Africans have a very low self-esteem because we don't know our stories and we haven't bothered to put importance on what makes us who we are. It's a fact. Something which I'm also guilty of, that I never used to put importance on that. But the moment I began reading and discovering more and exploring who I was more as an African, these are some of the things which I'm mainly concerned about, because the well-being of us as Africans, the reason why there's so much corruption in Africa is not just because it's a human flaw. It's because it's designed that Africans do not think, it's not that Africans do not think about the future, but the design of the after effects of colonialism has been that you only care for yourself. You only care for yourself, the government, and you only care for yourself and your immediate relatives. Yet in Africa, if we were to examine where that, before that whole disconnect became a part of our reality as Africans, it was that a king or omwami or the whole village used to live together as a community. And everything from ironsmiths to farmers to people who used to brew to the people who were specializing in medicine, every family was divided up into what made a whole unit of a functioning kingdom or a functioning tribe. Everything was thought about of in longevity. Those are some of the principles that we have ignored, and we have adopted governments or ways of life or ways of governance as a society that are so strange to our lives and to our people that there is a total disconnect into what it means to be human as an African. That our governance copies from the governance of other places that promotes more of individualistic tendencies than the tendencies that are meant to benefit society as a whole. And that's why we as Africans right now see the after effects of having dictatorships of people who steal money from African economies and invest it in Europe, and they wouldn't even care to invest it in their own countries. That's one of the after effects of people not studying their history and not knowing that part of the things that they propagate affect Africans in the future, or will affect Africa the worst in the future. So for me, there's a need to change that story. There's a need to change that narrative. And that's why we're beginning to have such discussions. So subscribe to my YouTube page, and I'll be dropping more facts. We'll be having more discussions. Begin sharing with me through the YouTube page. And yeah, I'm having a mat in the background. Right now, I have a beautiful piece of art that a friend of mine gave to me because I told him what I'm going to begin doing in the month of February. So my friend gave me like this very beautiful piece of art, which I'm going to be putting up after I hang up here. I'm going to be putting up a very beautiful piece of art that's kind of Afrofuturistic. There's some racist propaganda back in the day. This is a story where a fiction writer was once asked that why aren't there black people in science fiction, and he said because Africans never see themselves in the future. Now, if you're to consider that fact just at its face value, you will know how false and how wrong it is, because if you know your African history, you would retort and say that the Africans saw themselves in the future, or even that the future that we're seeing right now has been conceived before by African minds, even before we arrived here. The very story of the internet right now is because of some African deity called the frog that's being resurrected right now on social media. It's begun as a joke, but right now it's a fact. Coming, the frog is real. But jokes aside, the Africans having invented cosmic geometry, that means they built pyramids that were looking or coordinating their position, and their whole architecture was in alignment with stars in the sky. There's no way you can consider that being a fact that Africans don't see themselves in the future, when the Nubians that built pyramids were obsessed with this idea of opening up another dimension, that when they were that if they were in alignment with the stars and the sky, they would harness enough energy to see what was beyond life. Like after you die, you get into another gate. That's the whole obsession of them building pyramids that were coordinating with the stars. This whole thing of rockets is not a new phenomenon. So it's Black History Month. It's February. It's going to be a very interesting month. I want us to rediscover our history. I want us to begin redefining our history. Until the lion learns to speak, the tales of hunting always glorify the hunter. But we're right here because we know some shit, and we like to share and have a good time and drink some water while we're doing it and read some comments. Yeah, definitely. I see so much love coming through on my Facebook comments right now. I'll be posting this very discussion on my YouTube. That's where we'll be going. That's where we'll be headed. There's so much fun to be had in Black History Month. Nze njagala mukomye kwe kugamba nti omuzungu yakola kino, omuzungu yakola kiri, and then not considering what Africans have been able to contribute to the whole world. It's very important that we say that as our generation, so that the children who are coming after us have a sense of self-esteem, have a sense of pride on knowing who they are. But if there's a knowledge disconnect, if you're ignoring 5,000 years of stories that are documented, stories that have been told through African art and songs and hieroglyphs and fireplace universities, and only considering stories that have been told in history books that called Africans monkeys, that called Africans three-fifths of a human being, stories that have books that are considered holy but promote slavery. To me that doesn't pass. To me that's not the kind of world that I want to leave behind for my sons, for my daughters, for my sisters, for my brothers. So it's your boy GNL Zamba. Join me on my YouTube page, and the discussion is just beginning. So let's have some fun with it. Happy Black History Month. So I'll read through a few comments, see if people have some questions. Somebody says we should encourage Africans to read and research more about Africa. When you live in other parts of the world like the USA, you will be disappointed to know how people there know nothing about Africa, yet we Africans know a lot about the West versus what you know about Africa. I couldn't agree more. You're very right. Africans know more about Winston Churchill than the average Briton knows about Kabaka Mwanga or Mansa Musa or the Mandinga Empire. They know nothing about that. They will tell you, if you ask them Shaka Zulu belong to what tribe, or where the Abyssinians from, like, do you know there is a tribe that has an African tribe that has conquered Europe and brought civilization there? They will not tell you anything about that, but they will tell you about a white man who came to Africa and slaughtered about he slaughtered tens of millions of Africans. They will tell you about the history of that man. They will call him Sir Samuel Baker and heap all these other praises over a terrorist, praises over a man who should be mentioned in the same breath as Hitler. They will tell you about that man's history more than they can tell you about the stories that their grandfathers told them. Now, if that isn't a loss of self-worth, then I don't know what is. The Africans are defeated if they don't re-examine their history and begin studying more about what makes us us. Through hip-hop, we're going to be able to discover all these other things, because one of the facets of what it means to be hip-hop is being able to discover knowledge. Is being able to communicate stories, being able to tell stories. And to me, this is nothing like, this is basically one of those things that I'm very passionate about, because I'm very passionate about egalitarian societies. I'm passionate about the resources in the world being distributed equally among Chinese, among Africans, among South Americans, among Americans. If we blur the lines of being social and know who we are, and we can cut out all the inequality, we can have all the resources of the world that are so abundant, benefiting everybody in the world. But if we continue with the narratives of seeing other people as three-fifths of a human being, like your books always say, if you tell African Americans go back to Africa and they feel insulted and instead do not feel a sense of pride, then that means that we are still being defeated in our dream of being a universal Pan-Africanist with the colors of black, green, and red, where we're going to be able to reunite all the tribes. If we do not instill a sense of pride in being African, then we are defeating our own cause or our own people in sharing resources equally. Just to give you a little bit of why this month is so important. This month, a Black History Month, was started by a guy called Carter G. Woodson. Now, Carter G. Woodson, his struggle was trying to find African American stories to be included. Trying to find, he saw that so many African American stories were not being included into discussions of American history. Like, you have no idea how many African Americans have fought in the World War. Even Africans who have fought in the World War and made all these other contributions. The glory is always given to people who are white. It's been given to other people except the African Americans or the Africans. So he sought to introduce a month in a year where the history of us as a people would be collected and given, or we begin having discussions about Black history through the month of February. Now they chose, if I'm right, they chose the month of February because Frederick Douglass, who was one of the first abolitionists and one of the foremost writers of Black liberation, began writing all these, who was one of the forefront abolitionists of his time, Frederick Douglass, who had escaped slavery. He never knew when he was born, but he always celebrated his birthday in February, and so many other writers. So the month of February was designated off to be that month where Africans would celebrate their Black history. I'm putting my mat behind. I got this mat from, my grandma made this hat like using her own hands, you know. So I had to put it in my very first broadcast about Black history. This is my Black history experiment for the month of February. So if you're down, vibe with me. Go to YouTube, subscribe, check out fun episode. I think I'll be dropping an episode every 2 days, depending on how my schedule allows. I'm preparing to go perform on a couple of very good shows with my band. We've got some very nice festivals coming through in March, and we also have some parties in LA that we're organizing as in Simbi. And our brand is basically about bringing all tribes of humanity together and celebrating together. So in that very breath, join me on my Simbi YouTube channel, and then we'll begin having discussions from there. Thank you for anybody who has been with me through the comments. I see so many comments over here from YouTube. Everybody who has been tuning in, thank you. So unless you have any more questions, I will say bye. And as I say, wait for other questions to be answered. I'll read through some of the comments that I see over here. Most of them are shout outs. Shout outs to Crested Crane. That's the official bird of Uganda. I see some of my LA people online. Yeah, I see my boy in Amsterdam. People like You Made Me What I Am Today. The song Ania Yaman. Yeah, yes, that's a song about being grateful. And again, Common said, nobody can win a war individually. It takes the wisdom of the elders and the young people's energy. What I'm talking about right here is the young people's energy, the wisdom of the elders. The way I would exemplify it, that's like me taking what Eli Wamala had done and making it into a song. That's the wisdom of the elders and the young people's energy. It was me reigniting the young people's energy in Uganda through hip-hop and using the old people's wisdom, like Eli Wamala, who I admired so much as a writer coming up in my career. And that's how we have another classic, another Lugaflo classic we just started, you get me? So hip-hop legendary, definitely. Like, I meant that wisdom, yes. You cannot be a great rapper when you don't have a wealth of wisdom to draw from. So many lyrics are empty because people have little or nothing to say. It sounds like very self-aggrandizing. Yeah, I felt that, but I wouldn't be who I am if I wasn't a little bit egotistical. The thing is, you need to put your ego to good use. If you don't put your ego to good use, that's when the negative aspects, effects begin to occur. But when you put your ego to good use and service of your community, that's when the best results occur. Nobody ever changed anything by being meek. They said the meek shall inherit the earth. I don't remember Martin Luther being meek. I don't remember Che Guevara being meek. I don't remember all the people that have been able to change the world. I don't remember Mandela ever being meek. Mandela was called was called all sorts of names. He was imprisoned because he was trying to fight all sorts of evil. One of the evils that we need to fight right now is the information war, where Africans are not portrayed in their best lights. That's what we need to be fighting against. Yeah. Dope, man. The comments are just amazing me. They're just amazing comments. So we'll continue this discussion within due time. There's so much Black history to begin with. Maybe before I go away, I should tell you a little bit of the story of African creation. The story of African creation is so diverse that where in Europe they only have two schools of thought to consider. In Europe, they will consider the creation story being God created this earth with the breath of his whatever and commanded it to be. And then there is the one of the racist Charles Darwin. Yes, the racist Charles Darwin. Claiming that we evolved from the monkeys. That's the science view that everybody considers. But in Africa, the stories of creation are so vast. Like from the place where I come from, like in Uganda, you have 57 tribes. Now, the creation story of us as Bantu people is so different from how our Nilotic brothers tell that story. There is no uniform, there's no one solution, one fits all kind of story that tells the story of creation. And that's where some of the disconnect is still with teaching African history. So many universities that I've been to in North America, they only teach West African history, like there is no history in East Africa. Most of them have departments that are dedicated to West African history, and they forget that there is a whole coast of East Africa that has very rich history too. Most of them only give you documents or histories of places like Egypt and North Africa, and then they go to Ghana, Benin, Senegal, and then they will not give you anything about Uganda. They will not give you anything about Tanzania, Kenya, Sudan, Ethiopia, way up to South Africa. I mean, so many other universities try, and I need to give credit to those that do try, but to some, the ones that do try have hosted us in discussions and exhibitions about East African history. Iron Smiths on the coast of Zanzibar and among the Bantu. I've seen some good exhibits there, but there are so many other departments and universities, colleges that fall short. That shows you there's like a huge information gap there too. Where was I? I lost my train of thought. But the whole creation story from my tribe where I come from, it tells us that creation was from a woman. And everything began with a woman who was the youngest daughter of a god in heaven called Guru. And her name was Nambi. Let's begin history right there. The woman, the most important part of birth. Now, one thing that you need to consider that in all of African history and in all the creation stories of African history, much as all of them are different and spars of going different branches of how that story is told, you find that there are common threads or like a common denominator, that most of them agree that there is a divine conception, always a divine conception of something which is usually masculine, but the thing that gives birth or gives form to human life, the physical life that we see, the physical matter that we see, and the space, what folds it into who we are, what becomes a person and what becomes life, is basically a woman. And to us, that is Nambi. The story of Nambi is like really, really huge. And so many Africans will tell you that Black history and the whole story of divinity and how that divinity is explained is when they say I am the way, the truth, and the light. The Christians only take that literally, that there is a light, waliwe tala, waliwe kubo, then there is the truth. You get me? But to so many Africans and how that story, the original story, because if the Bible is just 2,500 years before Christ, we need to consider that there are stories in Africa of Kemetic origin where they have told that story. Abayindi Baina stories, the Indians have stories which are like 3,000 years old. The Africans have stories which are 5,000 years old. So we are not going to only consider African history by what beginning to recount from when the Bible says that the Bible that you know right now, because the Bible is also a replica of something that the Africans have known for a very long time, most especially the New Testament. The New Testament is a replica of so many African stories, and you see so many commonalities from the story of the Madonna and child. Remember I told you the Nambi, no Mwanawe. The story of the Madonna and child, all they have to do is draw a woman with flowy hair carrying a child. But that story has been an African story for a very long time. You'll find so many commonalities of that story and how that story gets distorted. So when they begin drawing stories of Maria Ngalino Mwanawe Yesu, there is always an older version of that story. In Africa, it's the story of Heru, there's Oset and Osa. It's a very Kemetic story, older than the story that is drawn in the chapels of the Roman Catholic Church. There is always an African original of that story. So Yesu, when you see a white Jesus, there's always been another version, an African version, which is way older than the version which you're being told that is happening in the Bible. Those are some of the things that we're going to begin exploring in my series of African and Black history, this Black History Month of February. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be all right. Thank you for joining me. I see Trevor Olinga joined me. Yeah, I'm about to close down this time. Somebody says, answer this. No one talks about Idi Amin. Yes, in Africa, you don't talk about Idi Amin because Idi Amin happened in the 70s. In the US, surprise, surprise. That's the only thing they know about Uganda. Love it or not, unless somebody is an intellectual, went to college and reads a few newspapers and is interested in African literature or African governance, that's the only thing that most people, any common man that you find will tell you Idi Amin is probably still the president of Uganda. It's a fact. But Ugandans and Africans haven't spoken of Amin in about 36 years, 43 years. I think it's about 43 years right now. That story hasn't been explored for that long. But for so many people, that's what's still going on. And if you still ask them the story about Africa, because CNN keeps on projecting these images of an Africa in war, an Africa in famine, an Africa of starving children each and every time, people still believe that you live in trees. It's a fact. If you tell so many African Americans about where you're from as an African, if they are not people who read or people who have traveled before, they still think Africans are still chasing elephants in the field. And they believe that when they go to Africa, there's going to be a lion at the airport. It's a fact. I've met these people. I've talked to some of these people. I've met very intelligent people who love Africa and would like to go back. But then you find so many people have been told by Fox News that that place where you're from, you shouldn't attach any pride to it because that place is a jungle. So for us who love our people, our black people everywhere, it's part of our duty to be the ambassadors of Africa and also be the people to kind of create that knowledge gap. Let me put it this way. The example that I've given you is not, I'm not blaming anyone, not letting anybody take the blame, but I'll put it in this context. that even the people who are fighting for African American liberation, people like Malcolm X, people like Du Bois, people like the Booker T. Washingtons of the time, never saw how important Africa was, or there was. How do I find the right words? I need to phrase this because these are some of the most foremost voices of the people who fought for African civil rights in the United States. But even for them, it wasn't until they heard from people like Kwame Nkrumah, it wasn't until they had people like Patrice Lumumba holding discussions in the houses talking about all what needs to be done about the African continent, that they were convinced that the Africans were people they could table and have discussions with. This is a fact that we need to. These are some of the facts that we need to examine as African people. That the teachings, it took a Jamaican man to create and wash away all the haze that has been created by the whitewashing of history and the unfair portrayal of Africa peoples in books and literature and in media and in reporting, to convince our African American brothers and all Africans, Afro-Europeans as well, who had been disconnected with the continent for so long. It took a Jamaican man by the names of Marcus Garvey to begin writing and telling people we need to unify as black people as a whole. That's the same thing which I'm trying to do right now, to make sure that there's a complete flow of knowledge of who we are as a people, and to see more things that unite us and see the bullshit for what it is that tries to divide us. When you take a lion out of Africa and take it to the United States, it does not change into a tiger. It still stays a lion. You get me? That's where I'm coming from. There's so many stories to be examined. There's so many arguments to be had. And I've also had so many stories of Africans who leave Africa, and because they're being fed so many racist stories about African Americans, that when they get to Europe or when they get to London and America and all those other places, that they still believe the stereotypes that have been propagated on the news about black people, about their fellow black people, that those Africans create a divide between them and other people. I'm not one of those people. I'm one of those people in the same breath of Marcus Garvey, to show you how united we can be when our stories show our commonalities. And not just as black people, because I'm not interested only in the unification and the well-being of black people, but I'm interested in the well-being of the society that we leave behind. I want the same dream that Martin Luther had. I want the same dreams of Marcus Garvey. I want the same dreams of Jesus. Even Jesus, the same dreams of egalitarian living, the same dreams of we can share and love each other. The whole thing about us being better as human beings is providing service to our society. Anything that does away with the greed, the classism, and the racism is the reason why I believe Black History Month presents us the opportunity to explore all these stories, to improve ourselves as society and as human beings. Thank you so much. It's your boy GNL Zamba. I hope I catch you on the next one. Peace and love. Love you so much as we explore more Black history this month. This mat was made by my grandma with her own hands, and it represents the time when Baganda children learned so much from their female grandmothers, who taught them about the ways of the people, who taught them about values of compassion, that taught them values of sharing, doing away with values of jealousy, how you were a piece or in a very huge metric of a village, a piece in the whole inner workings of a village, that you contributed much to a very bigger picture. Part of what my group does, my music group, is to examine these ancient stories and find how they provide solutions to our present time. And we believe that the future is ancient. That means in the future, for us to exist better as human beings, we need to go back to the values of compassion, the values of living in harmony with each other, and yeah, basically egalitarian principles of life where the resources benefit every citizen of the earth. Thank you so much. My name is your boy GNL Zamba. Subscribe to my YouTube channel and let the experiment continue. Thank you for joining me. Peace. That was fun, wasn't it? Everybody who has been joining me, everybody who has been liking, this is going to be available on Facebook for just a few hours. Then I'm going to be transferring it to my YouTube. Peace and love. Peace and love. Gwe mutima. Na 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 na. It's a beautiful birds they wanna taste.